Welcome to the NEREJ NYREJ podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. Today's podcast is sponsored by Cassidy Paving. Contact Cassidy Paving at CassidyPaving.com for all your paving needs. To be a sponsor on the podcast, contact me at rkaplan at nerej.com. And today I have two guests on the show, and I've known these two for quite a while. They are both members of IREM Boston. I don't know if you're members of the other IREM New York or IREM Connecticut. I don't know if you're members of any of those, but you can tell us.
Yeah, Flynn Law Group, Frank Flynn. We're members of Connecticut IREM and Rhode Island IREM.
Okay, well, the two guests we have here is Dave Barrett. He's with RCM Services, and Frank Flynn, he just introduced himself, and he is with Flynn Law Group. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about what RCM Services does.
So RCM Services, we do manage a few properties still, but we're more into the maintenance division, facilities division. We have a janitorial division, and we do renovations and snow removal. So any interior maintenance and renovations, as well as snow removal and janitorial, with a small portfolio of apartments.
Great. And Frank, tell us what you do without going into 2.5 hours of.
Very good, Rick. I will keep it short. We're a law firm. We're very heavily involved in all 6 New England states. We represent landlords, property owners, multifamily housing, cities and towns that have housing authorities. And we're in court a lot. We're also doing a lot of transactions, commercial and residential closings in all 6 states. We've been very busy. We've been growing and growing since the last time we saw you, Rick, which is probably about 5 years ago.
Was it 5 years ago? Well, I have to go back and research that. But, we actually had this show reserved because we were going to talk about what was going on with the rent control issue. And, fortunately, that has been dropped for the time being. But I still want to talk about a little bit why it was dropped. And do you think we will see this again?
So definitely this will be coming back. And so the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court decided that the ballot initiative contained an exception. It did not apply to religious-owned housing. And Article 48 of the Massachusetts Constitution says that ballot initiatives cannot refer to religion. And so kind of fatal mistake by the advocates of rent control here in Massachusetts by including that exemption for religious-owned housing. It caused the ballot initiative to be unconstitutional. And this thing is coming back, and I want to let Dave talk, so I'll let him go, and then I can talk about how it's going to come back.
Yeah, so it was terribly written, and I even think some of the proponents of the ballot initiative realized after some of the studies that were done, like Tufts did a big study on it, that it would have really devastating effects to the economy, both from a tax perspective and also an inventory perspective, as far as people developing new buildings. And if you drive into Boston today, me and Frank talk about it often, is we don't see any booms anymore. 5 years ago, the whole city was covered in them. And just the threat of this type of legislation coming up in the state is enough to deter many developers from building here. And one of the big problems we have is inventory. So there has to be a different approach. Governor Haley realizes that, and she's spoken up about it. But certainly, if it went on the ballot, it would have been dangerous because a lot of people probably would have voted for it. People who are leasing apartments don't want their rent to go up. The rents are very high, and we recognize that throughout Massachusetts and particularly the Boston area. And we want to find a solution as well. But the solution really is building more inventory, not stifling people from coming in and building more inventory, which we badly need. And rent control would shrink the inventory and probably give people an initiative not to move out of the housing that they're in if it's rent controlled. So there's a lot of bad aspects of it.
It's kind of ironic, to put in a bill to stifle the growth of multifamily when you're trying to tell everyone we need more housing.
Yeah.
And they're coming up with plans to kill the housing.
Yeah. So Rick, that's a very good point. And what Dave said was so vital. The Tough study showed that real estate values would decrease over $300 billion over the whole state. Every town would have apartment buildings, rental properties that were worth less than they were before rent control because those buildings could not raise their rent to keep up with expenses. Just a property manager's health insurance goes up 20% every year. And the building superintendent, same thing. If the rent control ballot initiative restricted it to the consumer price index, which has been 2 to 3% a year, and restricted the raising of rents beyond that, and so therefore any financing, any banks, any lenders are going to look at that and say, well, if the property can't meet their expenses going forward, we're not going to loan them, $200 million to build a property in Massachusetts because we don't know if they'll be able to meet their expenses in the future. It's an added risk to the loan. And so, as Dave said, there's no cranes in Boston. I'm sitting here in Boston right now. There are no cranes. As you look out there, there's really no building going on. And so this bill will come back in 2 years. They can bring it back in 2028 statewide. And of course, they're going to take out this religious exemption for housing. Okay. They could. Rent control can come back. Boston could apply for a home rule petition to the state legislature. They could try to pass it in the coming year. And Mayor Wu has been in support of rent control. Even this bill, she was in support of. So Boston, Cambridge, some other towns in the past, we used to have rent control in Boston, Cambridge, and Brookline until it was outlawed in the 90s. And Dave and I know you, Rick, you had, we wrote articles back then. We didn't have newfangled things called podcasts. So, now we have to speak out because we need more housing. The more housing, if we built 100,000 more apartment units, guess what? The price will go way down. That's where the incentives need to be.
Well, see, and that's an important message to put out there. How rent control is not going to lower the pricing of the market rates. It's going to keep it stable or maybe even increase somewhat. Building more, having more inventory, that eventually gets to the point where you're going to be able to lower, because now it's a matter of plenty of inventory. You've got a lot of competition out there.
Well, you're right.
Now you have to lower your.
That's exactly right. More supply. It's simple economics. More supply, then your demand, the price point will be less, right? So we got to build more units. We got to provide financing. Banks have to know that there isn't going to be rent control lingering in the future because they're not going to lend money even now. They're not going to lend money to build apartment complexes.
Yeah,
It's funny. It's funny
Go
how
ahead, Rick.
people don't put the two and two together. They don't think about things like that. Uh, and maybe it's important that we bring these issues up so
Yeah.
it's in front of them so they see it, you know.
And cities and towns will have less of a base of taxes. And look at Boston. They had to raise their rates on homeowners in Boston, right? Because there's less businesses. Cities and towns where apartment buildings are being valued less, the property taxes are less. Teachers, firefighters, police. I would say that we need more teachers. We're getting less and less teachers in every town. And firefighters, I'm not sure, but the effect is not going to be good when we can't fund a fire department in a town. That's what's going to happen. And it's probably already happening because there's less development.
Well, we know that it's happening because we can see the amount of people that are leaving the state.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible.
They put the Massachusetts millionaires tax in, and the first thing that happens is all your millionaires are moving out. Second thing that's happening is now, you know, a lot of the rents are high, and young people don't want to pay that. They're either moving to the suburbs, way out in the suburbs. And when I say way out, I'm talking about like into Worcester and Springfield and, places that I never even heard of. And I grew up in Massachusetts,
Yep. But it's
So,
good to see that, Rick, yourself, you haven't left the state because of the millionaire's tax. So that's a good thing. Dave's still here. Okay. So,
well,
um,
I'm waiting for them to give me $1 million so I can leave.
Keep doing
well,
podcasts.
yeah, you have these podcasts. You're getting so many 15,000 people viewing. That's amazing, Rick.
Yeah. Well,
You're doing great.
I connected to the New England and the New York Real Estate Journal, so it's on their website, so people go to it. Plus,
Yeah, so
So
they're
one other thing I want to bring up about this ballot initiative that people might not have realized is that it allowed tenants to sue their landlords under a Massachusetts law called 93A, and it defined any rent increase that went beyond the amount that was designated in the ballot initiative, that if a landlord might accidentally charge that amount, right, it may be gone above it, the tenant could then sue, and the Attorney General's office would be contacted to represent tenants. They could sue for triple damages plus attorney's fees. So if the landlord accidentally raised the rent beyond the amount, let's say it was a mistaken $10,000, the tenant could sue for $30,000 plus the attorney's fees. And so private attorneys could take these cases, and their attorney's fees all the way to a jury trial would be paid for. That could be $30,000 right there. So the impact on landlords by this ballot initiative, by including that, is dramatic and could be catastrophic. In fact, I did a rent control seminar for Boston IREM, Institute of Real Estate Management, and I called it the Massachusetts Rent Control, the oncoming disaster, because that amount of expense and impact on the industry, the real estate industry, would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
there's a few other points, and Rick, you hit one of them, is that initiative would not have decreased a single person's rent in the state. What ends up happening in other places that rent control has been adopted, and it happened here too when we used to have rent control, was that landlords could not maintain the buildings anymore. They couldn't do major capital expenses anymore or projects. So a lot of the real estate became run down and dilapidated. I'm sure you remember what the neighborhoods looked like back in the 80s versus the way Boston looks today. And if you go to some of these hearings, you'll hear a lot of the proponents of rent control say, villainize landlords, say that they don't contribute to the community, they don't do any improvements, which is not correct, because when these developers come in and build these buildings, they're improving sidewalks, they're improving streets, they're improving subways, they're creating green space. There's a lot of things these developers do to be allowed to build these buildings, and they work with the cities and towns to do so. And you can just look at Boston, how beautiful Boston is now compared to where it was many years ago. And, we'd really hate to see a lot of these beautiful buildings go back to being poorly maintained. And if you don't have the money to sustain yourself, if your taxes go way up and your insurance goes way up, and we've been seeing that in the industry, and you're only allowed to charge CIP. The ballot initiative was 5% or CIP, which is ever lower, which would have been the strictest rent control ever enacted in the country. But I don't think we've seen the end of it, because we already saw some compromise bills come out this year where some of the legislators were trying to circumvent the ballot initiative by coming up with something slightly better. So I do think we'll see this next year in the form of legislation. It can't be a ballot initiative for another 2 years, as Frank said, but we will see proposed legislation. So we do have to keep an eye on this, because my feeling is it's going to continue.
Well, it also gives landlords a chance to convert to condos and
Right.
sell off the,
Well,
Further shrink the inventory of apartments, right?
right.
yeah, and so two things there. So when there was rent control, in the past, if a tenant moved out, then the landlord converted to a condo, right? That's what happened in the 80s and 90s. So less and less rental units. There were more condo units, of course, but you are losing apartment stock. And a couple things with regards to legislation. So when the legislation comes out, it could be, because there was a proposal after this ballot initiative came out, they were going to, you know, make it so that cities and towns could opt in if they wanted to. So that was a legislative kind of move. And so if the state legislature passes something, it could be one of these opt-in, like, Boston could opt in, or Cambridge could opt in, or Brookline. And then the problem becomes, I don't know, I've been a lawyer for now going on 39 years. And so I remember rent control. And we used to have to go to the actual city hall and ask for permission. Let's say a tenant owed $5,000 in rent. You wouldn't think you'd have to get asked for permission. But if it was a rent controlled apartment, you'd have to go to city hall and have a hearing. And the city wasn't fast on these hearings. And you would have to prove your case so that you could get permission to bring the case in court. And so this cost more money for landlords. The city had to have a huge room with files on every property in the city of Boston that was a rental property. And you had to file forms. And every city and town that had rent control back then had different forms. They had different procedures. And it took them months to set this all up. Meanwhile, the $5,000 of rent owed was now $8,000. Nowadays, with rent being $2,000 a month, it's going to be $12,000. So while you're waiting, you have to deal with all this bureaucratic procedures. It'll be different for every town, and opting in still has that cloud of rent control still impacting financing. We do a lot of commercial closings. We'd probably be doing more if it wasn't for this cloud of rent control over the whole real estate industry. One other thing about developers they build these huge buildings. They were approved 10 years ago, right? They're building them now. South Station, at North Station, they built two beautiful, beautiful buildings. That whole blocks over there were redeveloped. The developers had to redo the subway stations, right? South Station, that whole area, the streets, the crosswalks, the lights, all that stuff. the developers had to pay for, and they had to provide affordable housing. So if they built 200 units of apartments, then, 10%, 20% of those units are affordable, which is a great thing. But these are all costs. This is why development costs so much in Massachusetts. It's so hard to get things approved and actually financed because it's so expensive.
Well, it's also very difficult to put together a project in the city with the cost of the land being so high, cost of materials being through the roof, cost of labor. I mean, all of these things are very expensive. And, you put together all these things to build a multifamily project, you have no choice but to charge the kind of rents they're charging. And, everyone thinks the landlord is, oh, they're making millions, at that building. They're not making millions. And as a developer, they work 24/7. They work very hard. So I have to defend the developer over any tenant, and I hope they don't get upset with me, but I know how the developers work so hard and everything they do is a roadblock, you know.
So, so these developers are really the friends of the tenants, right? Right? Everybody works together. Everybody should work together. The state should give incentives, the town should give incentives. So where the developer's cost of construction, which has skyrocketed, Rick is correct, and Dave and I have talked about this. The costs of construction have skyrocketed, materials, labor, as you said. And so if we can give incentives to developers, tax credits, state tax credits, whatever we can do, the more they build, the lower price for tenants. The tenants should be happy. If they build more, then that's just going to benefit tenants, and it will lower the price. It will lower the rent.
Yeah, because they're putting all the expenses on the back of the developer, where, if the state or even federal government help out to build these projects, I mean, they can complete a project and have lower rents, but
Yeah, if you're
that's
gonna
not
have an
happening.
empty, if you're gonna have an empty unit, you're gonna lower the rent, right? So it's supply and demand, as we were talking about. So if there's vacancies, people are gonna have to do initiatives and other rent lowering um, initiatives to be able to get the tenants to go to their units because they're going to be now competing with the rest of the city. If rent control goes into place, the inventory is going to shrink, as we discussed. Condominiumizing the units is going to shrink. The lack of development is going to shrink. The fact that the people with the rent control units are probably not going to want to move from a rent controlled unit to a non-rent controlled unit because there are some exemptions for new buildings, like a 10-year exemption, which isn't enough for financing. It's not enough for a financial plan or to finance anything. So yeah, we need to build, we need to have initiatives to build more. We need to loosen the red tape a little bit so that we can have more development.
Yeah, and so this ballot initiative, one thing, I think the three of us kind of remember back when there was rent control, there were like famous rich people that lived in rent controlled apartments. And I can't remember who they were, but they were in the Globe, front page of Globe. So and so, the person made millions. They lived in a rent controlled apartment, which you would think would go to an affordable, like somebody with a lower income. But people making millions of dollars were staying in rent controlled apartments forever because once they left, then that unit would go to market. But this ballot initiative didn't allow, once the tenant moved out, the landlord didn't get any relief under this ballot. It would forever stay at the capped rent. And this covered 70% of the rental units in Massachusetts, which is the strictest, as Dave said, the strictest in the country. And so the impact would have been devastating on landlords. But those famous people, I forget who they were, but they would never leave rent control. And in New York, I know we have people from New York listening and watching. New York has had rent control, and people will never move out, and they like try to gift it to their family members. And there's whole sections of New York I've seen where the buildings are just no longer maintained, dilapidated, run down, and they're abandoned. It really looks like a bomb hit certain parts of New York, unfortunately. And so we don't want that in Massachusetts. Rent control is not the solution. The solution is helping developers build more units. And I know the governor is trying to do that. I know the U.S. House of Representatives is trying to do that with some bills. And perhaps maybe this ancillary dwelling units, maybe that'll help since people can build some units onto their house as long as it's not more than 900 square feet. Rick, have you done anything on the ADUs?
No, I've heard quite a bit on that, but I haven't done anything on it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Which it's probably, I should probably have a show on that, or we can even talk about it a little right now. But that is something that is becoming very popular right now. So
Another
yeah.
bad thing about the ballot, the way the ballot was worded, and probably some of the legislation we're going to see is it would impact anybody who rented their unit or house for more than 14 days. So this could impact hotels where people go on vacation for 2 weeks. It could impact people who have houses on Cape Cod, who perhaps rented at a cheaper rate in the wintertime when off season. It would prohibit them from really doing that because once they did that, they would have to stick to that lower rent even in the summertime when they're on season. So it'd be very difficult to have an on season and off season rate. It would impact, homeowners who rent their places out for short periods of time. And, I think 14 days is definitely not long enough because a lot of people go on vacation for 14 days. Are you going to stay at a hotel for 13 days and then have to move your last day before you take your flight out to another room because they're afraid they're going to get impacted by rent control? It just really doesn't make sense where that's such a small window of time. And like I said, it could impact the hotel industry and many other people that the intent was not to impact them with this.
Yeah.
that,
And so, Dave, you bring up an interesting point. That's all true. Everything you said, that this rent control initiative was impacting and possible legislation in the future, would impact. But hotels, people might not know this, but we have to go to court because we represent some hotels. We have to go to court. If somebody stays past a certain time frame, we have to bring an eviction action. If they're not paying their bill and they haven't paid their bill for 30 days, well, you can't just toss them out of the hotel room. We have to take them to court. And so there are lots of protections in Massachusetts for tenants. We really don't need to be adding rent control on top of the, 20 laws or more that help tenants, in Massachusetts. There's already plenty of laws. I think Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. are probably the most liberal with regards to helping tenants with regards to evictions.
well, there's also, Dave, you brought up a good point because we just had this here, the soccer teams coming in. A lot of the people that came in to watch these games, they were from other countries and they were staying here for more than 14 days. And they loved Boston, but that could change if this goes into play. But they loved Boston. But Airbnbs, I don't think you could get an Airbnb in Boston. or even south or north of Boston. You know, they were going everywhere. So, but they were staying more than 14 days, most of
Yeah.
those people.
Yeah, Rick, you're right, because I think I saw the same guys in kilts, walking
Yeah.
around our office,
I know.
Just
I've
start,
never seen so many guys in skirts and running around in the city of Boston.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
yeah, and you want to encourage that kind of tourist visitation because it brought millions of dollars into Boston. And the restaurants have been hurting for so long. And I think perhaps some restaurants were saved by the whole the World Soccer tournament being here in Massachusetts. That really saved a lot of restaurants.
Well, it
And
definitely saved the beer industry.
oh, it sure did. I saw you down there, Rick, participating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had that big glass.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I know it was an interesting time, but tourism is a very important thing to the city. Well, to the whole state of Massachusetts, because there's a lot of tourism that comes in here, and some people do spend more than the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you have
yeah.
to stay for 13 days next time.
right. 13 days to find another Airbnb or something.
Yeah.
But that's that would be a shame if that happened. But we talked enough about we'll come back to the rent control when it comes back into the bill. But now let's talk about some of the eviction policies because, that's a scary thing for a landlord, especially smaller guys.
Yeah. So, Rick, we represent and we bring a lot of cases a year in all 6 states. Small landlords are really feeling it because the rules and the laws are really stacked against them. And so we're seeing squatters that are going into units, or even the tenant might move out and leave the apartment, so to speak, to one of their relatives, which they can't legally do. And the next thing you know is we've got to go to court, and it's going to take a month or two. We try to do the speediest route to get the squatter out because they're not entitled to be there. You don't know if they have a criminal record. They've never been screened by the landlord. And so we have squatters going into units. We have still drug activity happening in a lot of apartments. And we have tenants who refuse repairs and then try to use the failure of the landlord being able to repair because they can't get in and try to use that to argue that they shouldn't have to pay the rent that they signed up to pay. So that's just a small example of some of the issues that landlords face. And we represent companies with 120,000 units across the country and small guys that just have one or two units. And so we have that entire range. And it can be difficult, but we push the cases forward and try to get the quickest court hearing that we can on these cases.
So, I was talking to someone, they were telling me, everyone talks to me about all their problems in real estate. Like I can solve them, but
You're the real estate psychologist.
yeah. So they were telling me about a tenant they have. They have a few maybe 2, 3 family homes. They own a few of them. They have one tenant that is on Section 8. She wasn't paying her share. She also was she was breaking certain things, and so they wanted to evict her, because she it was time for her to go. She overstayed her welcome, and they brought it to court, and she went to is there like a uh, they don't charge for legal fees,
Oh,
whatever
sure.
they.
The tenants are entitled to get attorneys. And so there are legal services, various types of legal services that are free to tenants that, aren't making a lot of money and can't afford a private attorney.
So basically, what these free attorneys were doing was they're putting in a delay or a postponement um, for the case.
Mhm.
So every time they do that, now she's there for another month or two, So it's now coming up. Well, I think they finally settled that she was going to move out on July of this year. And now she's going to be there July. It's going to be 2 years going through all this.
After they brought the case?
Yeah.
Well,
So,
that is quite long. I
yeah.
mean, really, but there are mechanisms, unfortunately, that tenant attorneys can put in place to try to delay things. I mean, we fight against these. We have the staff. I mean, we're up to 39 people. We have 13 paralegals and 17 attorneys. But we have the staff where we can do the paperwork and make things go faster. But there are things, you're right, that the tenant attorneys can do. Now, I want to say, Section 8 is a vital housing program. It does provide housing for many tenants. Not all tenants are just trying to victimize the landlord. Most tenants are not. But there are a few that will try to, push the system, do the old, there's problems in the unit and I'm not going to pay rent withholding kind of tricks. And those things are not proper. So we see it. You have to fight strongly against it and then have the experience to be able to deal with those issues. And so that's what we do. I've been doing this since I was actually at legal services back at Boston College Law School back in 1985, Rick. Okay.
during during the whole rent control issues.
During rent control,
Yeah.
yes. And so, yeah, it's fairly easy for a tenant attorney to delay cases, but
Well,
you
it's
know,
funny because she signed an agreement that she's going to move out in July, and she decided she's not moving out in July. She said she signed that agreement under distress.
well, the courts have procedures, and that's fairly easy to combat because the courts have procedures. They have mediators, independent, impartial mediators. Judges go through a colloquy with the resident, asking them, well, do you understand the agreement? You understand what you're signing. And a lot of times the agreements, the courts work to make them fair and they're not just one-sided agreements. And when the landlord's not getting their benefit of the bargain at the end, the landlord's entitled to possession and not to further delays. And so it requires a certain way, probably of arguing or pushing the case. But we do deal with a lot of these cases.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because I wanted to stress how important it is to have an attorney that specializes in this type of thing with the landlord and tenant issues. Because if you just hire a guy that's a real estate attorney, he wouldn't know what you're talking about most of
Well,
the time.
you're right. But with all things, right, it's good to have a specialist. You're going to redo your kitchen. You don't want just a general contractor, right? And so, if you're going in for surgery, they better have done, the same kind of surgery before.
Exactly.
But you're so right. And Dave, actually, we worked for Dave and handled evictions for him. And tenants try all kinds of tricks. Right, Dave?
Yeah, we've had a lot of luck though, and we've been able to, get things resolved pretty quickly. You're right. We always try to make a deal. The courts look favorably on giving people a deal, and we would always do that. But I have found that if the tenant breaches the deal, the judges do not like that very much. And they usually side with the landlord at that point if they break their word or they break their deal. I think that for small landlords, the couple things to look out for is the way you handle the security deposits, because they will come back to you on that. and try not to be a nice guy. If people skip their rent or really late on their rent, you really have to stay on top of that, because once they fall behind by a couple of months, and then you start the eviction process, it could be another couple of months or so before you get resolution to that. And with the rents being up to at least a couple of thousand a month, you can add up your bill pretty quickly. So try to be diligent with giving them late notices. And it's okay to be a nice guy, but you have to make sure you follow up that renting your unit is a business. I These are the mistakes I see smaller landlords run into, and I'm sure you've seen much worse, Frank. But that's
Yeah. So small landlords, we try to educate them on these things, and Dave's like picked out some of the topics. Security deposit is, remember that rent control has that tripling clause in it on overcharges beyond the rent control limit. Well, security deposit mistakes by landlords, especially small landlords, that there are attorneys that their cottage industry is to sue landlords for security deposit violations, and they will take it to trial because they will try to get their $20,000-$30,000 of legal fees and the security deposit tripled. And it could be a $2,000 deposit. They're suing for 6,000, but their legal fees will be 30. So we always strive at the beginning on those security deposit cases to try to settle them, get rid of them, because those are very dangerous to small landlords and to large multifamily housing landlords too.
Right.
So it's very important. There was something I wanted to say about rent control. Well, it'll come to me.
Yeah, well, you can always throw it out when you remember. I mean, when we get to our age, we forget a lot of things. Just,
No, come on. We're all still young, We're all still
yeah,
vital and young.
you are.
You,
I'm not so young.
uh,
So, um, if when you make the lease up for a tenant, and this is a question that I've always wondered, are there things that you need to put in there to kind of give you some little security that so when it goes down the road, you don't, oh, then they can't move out for another 8 months because you didn't have them fill out a lease the proper way, or they didn't have that
yeah.
in the lease or whatever.
Yep. So some basic things. The landlord needs a strong landlord lease. Okay. All the laws are skewed toward the tenant. So number one, you have to have a lease. And number two, the shortest lease is not the best lease. The longer lease is the better lease. We have a strong landlord lease. We have a strong set of rules. Okay. If we can cover everything in the lease and cover everything in the house rules, then when some situation comes up, we don't have to be guessing after whether it's a violation of the lease or the house rules. We have a set of house rules, 50 house rules. We just keep adding them as a case something new comes up. We just keep adding them. And then our lease is probably residential lease, probably 20 pages. But it's good that you have to have a strong lease. And then every landlord needs to have an attorney in their corner, okay, that they can call, okay? And there's not going to charge them a huge astronomical amount. We've been seeing now some landlord attorneys charging close to $300 an hour. Well, the small landlord is not going to be able to talk with their attorney too often if the rate's getting really high. So we try to keep our rates reasonable, but you need a landlord attorney in your corner to advise you on all these different things and give you things that can save time and future legal issues. So we have policies and we have different things, emotional support animal policies, different reasonable accommodation policies. We're seeing a huge uptick in fair housing cases where landlords are being sued for alleged violations of disability laws or discrimination laws. And so we're getting one a week. a case that we respond to, and we try to get rid of that case. We try to get it dismissed as soon as possible. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're also involved, we're defending a lot of landlords from mold claims, volatile organic compound claims. That means like air quality in residential apartments. And so we're seeing mold, air quality in units where tenants will sue for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so these are highly concerning issues, and then when you throw rent control on top of these issues that are happening already, fair housing claims, mold claims, and now rent control, that's like a triple whammy. So these are just a few things that are happening.
Yeah, and, anything that a tenant goes to court for and wins now becomes a guideline for people that are renters. All their family and friends. Oh, well, so-and-so won this case for because the air temperature wasn't right in their apartment or whatever. Now everyone's starting to sue all over the place for that. But it's a crazy business. It really is.
Yeah.
It can be a tough business. People can, though, build wealth, through the value of their properties. They maintain those properties. They have a good lawyer that they can talk to. If they have a good company like David's company, maintaining the outside and the inside of the building, 20 years later, you can sell that property and you can make good money. But the more regulation, the more restriction on the rents that can be charged, the less desirable it will be for people to buy real estate. And we're seeing that now. We do a lot of closings, but we're seeing there's properties on the market and people are just kind of circling it and they're not quite making an offer, and it just sits there. And interest rates are too high right now, and so that doesn't help. But people are very hesitant. They're not sure they're going to have their job next year. So the whole real estate industry is being buffeted by these economic waves of change.
Although I did hear an economist this morning saying that the third quarter of this year, we're going to see a real estate pickup, sales of real estate pickup. So hopefully we'll see that.
Well, that would be nice, but in Massachusetts, historically, a lot of kids go to college. Students from other countries would come. Their parents might buy a condo for them and their friends so that they could stay there for, you're not seeing that as much. You're not seeing, a lot of students from other countries wanting to come and be at Massachusetts colleges because Massachusetts colleges are some of the best in the world. And, what parent doesn't want their kid to go to the best college in the world and get a degree? They're just not investing in the real estate anymore. And so, that's also, I'd be surprised that the real estate market's going to pick up because what are gasoline prices now?
Well, it could pick up in other parts of the country too. So
Oh, yeah.
it might not be here, but other
I
parts of the
think
country.
New Hampshire, we're seeing closings in New Hampshire.
I know. I
Yeah.
heard they're going to put up a gate because they don't want any more people from Massachusetts coming there. Right,
Yeah.
Dave?
Well, some developers are going to New Hampshire now because of the rent control, the cloud of rent control that hangs over us. But, having this discussion, I did want to say that we do care about our tenants, and I didn't want to sound like all one-sided that we're, all pro landlords. I think most landlords do care about their tenants. We do care about the rising cost of rents, and we do want to do something about it. Um, as we had said, we need to increase inventory. We can't do anything to stifle inventory. And certainly, if you look at it with a clear head, and you look at the economic statistics and the reports and what rent control will do. That's why we're so opposed to it. Not that we don't want the tenant to benefit from it. The reason why we're opposed to it, one of the reasons, is that we think that the tenant in the long term would be hurt from it, as well as the landlords. Of course, being landlords, we are pro landlord, but we also care about our tenants. And I just wanted that message to get out there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. We are running out of time. We have enough we could talk about this for a whole afternoon. And
Yes.
there's so many other issues that we haven't even touched on, but maybe for another time.
Sure.
Yeah, that would
Dave,
be great, Rick.
yeah. So Dave, you have any last words you want to say? You got, was that your last words?
That was my last word, and I
Okay.
thank you, Rick, for having us on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and get your perspective as well as Frank's.
And Frank, you have any last words? Yeah, of course you do.
Well, yeah, you give a lawyer a microphone, what they're
No.
going to take advantage of that. But I do want to thank you, Rick, for having us. These issues, every other month, there's like new issues coming up. And so maybe, we'll come, if you'll have us, we can come back on and talk about some of these other topics in depth. But just with regards to rent control will reduce housing stock, it will increase prices. And I remember what I was going to say. Right now, because of the rent control threat, and it went away for like a year or two, we think, landlords are now raising the rents because, in anticipation of future rent control, they're raising the rents because they were worried that they would be unable to cover their costs in the future. And so the rent control bill, the ballot initiative, is causing, just the fact that it happened is causing increase in rents right now because landlords are afraid that they won't be able to increase the rents in the future to cover their costs. So that's my parting thought.
Okay.
And so Rick and Dave, great to see you both.
Hey, it's
Thank
always great to see you guys, and you're both always invited on. You just let me know when you want to come on. I'll find a spot for you.
Thank you, Rick.
thank you,
I
Rick. We really
appreciate what you guys, the information you guys can talk about because it's very valuable. It saves them $300 an hour for an attorney.
There you go, Rick. That's right. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
We're talking with Dave Barrett with RCM Services and Frank Flynn with Flynn Law Group. And Frank, what's your website?
So it's Flynn Law. It's Flynn Law Group. We're in Boston. We're in all 6 states.
Okay.
And you can find on our website, you can find our email addresses and phone number if you'd like to contact us. So it's Flynn Law Group, PC, and our phone number is 617-988-0633. So 617-988-0633. And we're right here in the heart of Boston in the financial district.
And Dave, what's your website?
We do not have a website. We do all of our business word of mouth, but my email is dbarrett@rcm-services.com. And our phone number here is 617-787-5800.
And the information will also be in the profile of the podcast as well as on the YouTube platform.
So my email address is frank@flynnlaw-ne.com. So it's frank@flynnlaw- the little minus sign -ne.com.
Okay, great. Again, we're talking with Dave Barrett from RCM Services and Frank Flynn from Flynn Law Group. And before we go, I'd like to thank our sponsor for our podcast, which is Cassidy Paving. Contact Cassidy Paving at CassidyPaving.com for all your paving needs. To be a sponsor on our podcast, contact me at Kaplan at NEREJ.com. And I just want to thank you all for listening to the NYREJ podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. Until next time.